Well, we're speaking here with Joe Higgins, MEP for Dublin constituency. Joe, we're very happy that you agreed to participate in the Politics Talk project. Joe, I'd just like to put a few questions to you about your current term in the Parliament. You're a newcomer to the Parliament, and I'd be interested just to hear about your own personal priorities going forward for the remainder of your term.
Well, a key part will be absolute opposition to the neoliberal economic philosophy that dominates the European Union, its institutions, the Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament. That economic policy has been afoot now for many years, with disastrous consequences, as we see in the crash in various economies around the world. Rising unemployment, a crisis in public services, and enormous pressure and attacks on the living standards, livelihoods and pensions of working people. So wherever there is an opportunity to oppose the manifestation of that particular policy, and for example through the Employment and Social Committee, of which I'm a member, that would be a very important part of my agenda. The other issue will be to give representation to working people, whether they're from Ireland or anywhere in Europe, to try and back up and stand in solidarity with the struggles of workers against the neoliberal agenda, against the race to the bottom, workers like those from Coca-Cola at home who are disgracefully sacked because they wouldn't accept a massive wage cut, this by one of the most profitable companies in Europe, and that's rampant throughout the European Union. So they will be some crucial objectives which I am and will continue to work on.
And in terms of pursuing these objectives during your term, do you feel that your position during the Lisbon debate domestically back in Ireland in any way undermines the influence or the kind of role that you may have going forward in this new Parliament?
No, this new Parliament, I have no illusions in this new Parliament in terms of what it's going to mean for workers' rights or for achieving social objectives. This Parliament has a huge right-wing majority. That was very clear in the election of Mr. Buzek as its president, who, when he was Prime Minister in Poland, carried out a vicious policy of cuts, attacks on workers' living standards, privatizations, and in general a very right-wing economic policy. That's the person that the European People's Party and a large swathe of the Social Democrats chose to put into power. So it's quite a signal. Mr. Barroso has been reappointed, another raging neoliberal. So that's that, and how working people will achieve changes, either to stop issues that are coming down the line that will be further pressure on their livelihoods and living standards, or to break new ground, will be by their own mobilisation of their own power independently. And I will, of course, I will raise the issues in the Parliament and fight and expose those issues. But really, it's only if they're backed up by action, people power and by organised and mobilised power of working people. It's only then will they be affected.
And I suppose in terms of achieving these aims, is there anything that you think could be improved in the way business is done in the Parliament, or are there any criticisms on the other hand that you could make of the way business is done when it comes to introducing legislative change or new initiatives?
Well, I mean, the Parliament can't institute legislation, can't initiate legislation.
Sure.
I mean, that's a massive thing to begin with.
I suppose when it comes to negotiating with the council, representing its constituents, do you think there's any fault in the way business is done here in the Parliament?
Well, obviously there is an enormous amount of cynical horse trading done among the groups in the Parliament. Again, in the election for Mr. Buzek, that was clear, where the second 2.5 years will undoubtedly be a member of the Social Democrats. I think the cynicism was evident in the appointment of the new president of the council and the foreign representative, a lady who was never elected to anything, maybe to some hockey club locally, I'm not too sure, but whose claim to that position comes from being nominated to a medieval relic in Britain, i.e. the House of Lords. So this was further horse trading. Again, the two groups, the bigger political groups, each getting one of the plum positions. No honest debate out in the open as to what was involved here, what they stood for, what was traded in those negotiations. I find that reprehensible.
And I suppose just responding to the kind of the answers that have been provided, what always strikes me is that there is a positioning going on when you do respond to these types of questioning, where it comes across that there's a defensive line or a kind of a protesting kind of role that you participate in. But do you think, are there positive ways in which you can contribute other than to cry foul when you believe some wrong has been done? Are there things you think that you can posit or bring to the table?
Well, I mean, in the committees that I'm on, the international trade and the employment and social affairs, of course, I will argue as cogently and coherently as I can for measures that radically would change the livelihoods and the effect of neoliberal policies on the livelihoods and the living standards of working people. In the case of international trade, I'll be looking very closely at how the EU conducts its trade in poorer countries. And I will be seeking to look through the propaganda hype that the EU is the biggest benefactor on the face of this earth to poor people, when in fact the evidence that I'm turning up so far is that the free trade agreements, etc., that it has been negotiating with countries in Latin America, Africa and the Caribbean are highly predatory. So bringing all that out into the open and demanding changes in how these are done, I would see that, yes, as being a very positive activity, working with social organizations in countries affected by a trade agreement, affected negatively, giving them a representation, bringing their experience and the interests of the small producers, the workers in those countries. Yeah, I would see that as all being very positive. Okay, we'll see what happens. At the end of the day, the neoliberal majority in the European Parliament will vote in the interests of big business and of the European multinationals.
And I suppose finally, turning to these democratic mechanisms that are introduced by the Lisbon Treaty, which, in your opinion, do you believe carries the most potential in terms of reforming, in whatever way, the way citizens are heard amongst the institutions in the European Union?
Well, you see, if you speak about democratic gains in the Lisbon Treaty, you have to see what democratically is lost as well. And the shift of power from member states, which means from the citizens of member states elsewhere into the European Parliament, I see that as not a plus for democracy, but a minus. I see issues like the getting rid of the absolute veto in trade in services for future World Trade Organization agreements as being a negative for democracy. But say insofar as that those powers have been shifted and then the European Parliament is a co-legislator, so to speak, then of course we will work very hard and very vociferously that any legislation that is put through is done not in the interests of corporate Europe and financial Europe, but in the interests of the big majority of ordinary Europeans.
Joe, thank you very much for participating, and I wish you well for the remainder of your term.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.